Luca here from Knickscast, coming back at you with another video. And today I will be recapping the Knicks head coaching search thus far, about a week or so into it, after the Knicks fired Tom Thibodeau last Monday. But if you guys haven't already, hit that like button, hit that subscribe button as well, turn on the notification bell so you know when I go live or drop a new video. Regardless, let's get into it. So last Monday, the New York Knicks, collectively with Leon Rose and James Dolan, the rest of the front office, and a meeting with the players, solicited a firing of Tom Thibodeau after 5 seasons. Now, there was a lot of mixed reaction to this, mostly positive from the Knicks fan base, but there's also been two perspectives to come from this coaching search. There's a section of Knicks fans who say, give Leon Rose your full trust. He's done a great job with the organization. He's had his slip-ups, but he should earn your full trust. He's made the Knicks a contender this far, almost a championship contender. And the next coach will decide, the next coach will be to solidify that identity, eventually to win a championship. Hopefully our first since 1973. This needs to be a comprehensive coaching search. This front office needs to take their time. They need to exhort all avenues. They need to look at all resources. There's another side to the Knicks fan base, which has been, I'd say, the minority, but there's been some loudspeakers who said, you know, where's the plan? Why have you not hired a guy already? You fired Tom Thibodeau. Where's the candidates? I mean, there have been candidates, obviously, but where's the backup plan? Shouldn't you have hired a coach by now? And I think there's a little bit of a happy medium between the two. And there's also an interesting perspective that Jerry Ferrara had mentioned on Twitter. He's great. He said, you know, maybe the front office is throwing smoke screens out there because there are times where the Knicks don't want the media or don't want the fans to know what they're actually doing or what they're thinking. And then there's also I'd say, perspective or a thought process that goes that the Knicks leak little crumbs of a certain interest in a player or a certain interest in a coach to the point where that eventually becomes a mutual partnership. You look at the Knicks having interest in Karl-Anthony Towns for the past 2 years. I think you could even say with OG Anunoby there were Knicks rumors prior to the trade, not just in December, but months prior, where a lot of Knicks fans were like groaning at the idea of OG Anunoby originally because of his injury history, but he's worked out great this far. And then there's also perspectives where, I go back to Jerry Ferrara, you mentioned there could be a possible smokescreen. And the identity that the Knicks don't really want the fans or the media to know what they're thinking. They could have a candidate in-house right now. We would never know. So they're throwing out could be throwing out smoke screens. They could be legitimate candidates. And I look at like a reporter like James Edwards throwing out speculative head coaching candidates. Mike Malone, James Borrego, Darvin Ham, Taylor Jenkins, and Mike Brown. More on Mike Brown later because there's actually interest per Ian Begley. But these are speculative. Doesn't mean the Knicks have interest. Doesn't mean the Knicks have connections. They're just speculative candidates because they're open on out of the market. Darvin Ham, I think he's an assistant with the Milwaukee Bucks, if I'm not mistaken. Previously a head coach of the Los Angeles Lakers. After 2 years, he was fired. Tyler Jenkins, fired after a few years with the Memphis Grizzlies. I believe it was either March or April. Mike Malone, having connections with the Knicks in terms of being a former assistant with them back in the mid-2000s. Also being born and raised in Astoria. Fired by the Nuggets shortly before the playoffs even began. Mike Brown, not really having a connection with the Knicks. Maybe in terms of agency, who knows. But Mike Brown, available head coaching candidate, was recently fired from Sacramento. And James Borrego, don't know what the connection is there. I believe he's an assistant in New Orleans. And was previously a head coach with the Charlotte Hornets. I think he made a play-in appearance with them, if I'm not mistaken. Could be wrong. They eventually would fire him and hire Steve Clifford. What a mistake that was. But regardless, just looking through these candidates, and then I'm going to also break into the candidates right now that the Knicks have supposedly had interest in. You have Chris Finch. You've had Jason Kidd. Ime Udoka, who are all under contract, who are all employed by organizations as head coach. Ime Udoka with the Rockets. They just made the playoffs for the first time in a couple of years since 2020 with the James Harden days. They made it to the first round. I believe they lost the Warriors in 7, if I'm not mistaken. You have Chris Finch, made the Western Conference Finals for the second consecutive year in a row with the Minnesota Timberwolves. And then you have Jason Kidd in which the Mavericks made the play-in tournament just barely without Luca Doncic since they traded him away. But it's interesting, right? You look at those candidates and you say, why are we looking into candidates that are already employed and that most likely these organizations are going to reject the hiring of? And I get, in a sense, I get where the Knicks are going. You want to look at all avenues I mentioned earlier, but to me, doesn't really make any sense with any of these three. Now, Chris Finch, obviously, I think the Timberwolves are going to believe that he's the eventual head coach to help them win in the future, hopefully a championship for them in that sense. Ime Udoka helped him out with the rebuild more so than Steven Silas. Growth of the young players, made the playoffs for the first time in 5 years. He's not going anywhere. Jason Kidd, interest in the Knicks having interest in him, former player with the Knicks. Jalen Brunson being his former player, Kidd being his former coach. And the thing with, I'll start off with Kidd. Kidd, I'm not certainly a fan of. I've read on Twitter and I've read through a couple of, not so much analysts, but people who do the extra work and say, and actually do the extra research on what the Mavericks do, their tendencies. Kidd's tendencies, same as Tibbs. Doesn't play a lot of young players. Fans complaining, why doesn't Olivier Maxence Prosper get time? There's fans complaining about other young players not getting playing time and having the right to deserve it. Isolations. The Knicks, one of the more isolation-heavy teams. I complained multiple times this past year of the Knicks not having identity on offense except iso ball. There's not a lot of movement. There's not a lot of on-ball or off-ball movement. Not consistent enough. And Jason Kidd relies on isolation. Not to say he isn't creative in other areas, but majority of the plays that he, or I should say, one of the top teams in isolation were the Dallas Mavericks, and that was with Luka Doncic, that was with Kyrie Irving. So what's to believe that would change? It would essentially be a lateral move. And another thing, just to get into the hiring of these head coaches in terms of the ones that are already in place, you're going to have to give up compensation for these coaches. And be it like you want to go back to 2014 when the Bucks traded for Jason Kidd and the Brooklyn Nets acquired 2 second-round picks. I don't think that's going to be the asking price anymore. I think they're going to at least ask for a first-round pick. And the Knicks, with the situation they have right now in terms of limited cap, limited assets in terms of draft, you really can't give up a first-round pick, I believe, because that would be in violation of the Stepien rule. You can't trade consecutive first-round picks in consecutive years. They already gave up a lot of first-round picks for Mikal Bridges. They want to hope that they're right in the sense that Mikal Bridges is one of the final pieces for a championship. But regardless, going back to Kidd, having a lot of the same tendencies as Thibodeau, that's not great. Very rigid. That just seems like a very lateral move, and I wouldn't be a big fan of that. You want to go to Ime Udoka, great defensive-minded head coach, primarily a defensive head coach. He did have his time with the Boston Celtics 1 year. He was eventually fired after having an affair with one of the Boston Celtics staff members. But Udoka, I was watching this video from Andy Hoops, another great YouTuber, and essentially one of the flaws of Udoka is very much limited offensively and what he can do. And the way you look at this Knicks offense, I should say the Knicks team overall, they more so have the making of an offensive team right now. You know, this isn't the Tibbs team of last year where you have Dante DiVincenzo and Julius Randle, where it's a very slow-paced style of ball, where it's a very much a Tibbs team. Now, obviously, Tibbs is gone now, but this is a modern NBA team. You want to win in the modern NBA, you got to win with a modern NBA offense. You have to win with putting players in better positions to succeed. Karl Anthony Towns, Mikal Bridges, OG Anunoby, Jalen Brunson. Can't be just heavy iso ball. And if you hire somebody who does that the same thing with limited offensive creativity, it's just a lateral move at this point. The Knicks have to extort all avenues, or I should say explore all avenues. And one of the things that was leaked earlier in the coaching search was the Knicks want a guy who can play the bench. Tibbs did not find value in the bench much last year. You know, Landry Shamet getting very limited playing time. DeLon Wright finally seeing some playing time in the playoffs. Tibbs did not explore all avenues with the bench. Tyler Kolek, you could argue, should have received some playing time during the regular season. He did, but that was more so when Jalen Brunson was hurt. And you could see that Kolek, when he was out there, despite somewhat being limited defensively, was running an actual offense. Three-pointer wasn't there all the way, and obviously that's a development in the process. He was a great shooter in college, but Kolek was out there running an offense. You could tell he was trying to make players better. Cameron Payne getting minutes without that was awful, especially in the playoffs, where eventually after when the Pacers series came along, he was eventually a dud, basically unplayable. And I'm trying to like amongst all these things, right? With the looks at Jason Kidd, Ime Udoka, and Chris Finch, and looks at these other speculative coaches who, again, the Knicks might not even be interested in at all. And I will say, confirming back to Mike Brown, who I might even do a video on, the Knicks do have interest per Ian Begley, who he mentioned in the latest episode, I believe, of the Knicks Film School podcast with Jonathan Macri. And Brown, recently fired from the Kings, is known to be a more offensive coach. You saw the last 3 years with the Kings. His first year was phenomenal. The Kings made the playoffs for the first time since 2006. Domantas Sabonis, De'Aaron Fox having a nice two-man game. Kevin Huerter having a career year. And one of the big things with Brown is obviously of the offense, the pace and space. He learned under Steve Kerr and Greg Popovich, and I believe Rick Carlisle as well. One of the big downsides with Mike Brown is in-game adjustments, defense. The Kings were not one of the better defensive teams. They were either league average or really below average with the players that they had. And another thing that came about, or I should say that came about when Mike Brown was fired, was the ascension of Keon Ellis, really underrated two-way player across the league, and Brown would essentially not play him as much. And when Doug Christie got the call to be the head coach, he used Ellis, and Ellis started to ascend. He became a better player. And he's a really bright young player, good two-way player, can shoot the three ball, can defend at a really high level. But it's interesting with Brown, and I think with the offensive makeup that he has, very much pace and space, very much Princeton principles in terms of offense, it's interesting to see him matched with the Knicks because this is a modern NBA team. I'd be very much concerned how they handle the defensive side of the ball, but again, the Knicks would have to lean into a pretty much all offensive identity. And I'm also curious as well with Mike Brown, is he the coach to bring this team forward? The last time Mike Brown went to a finals, I believe, was 2007 with the LeBron team. LeBron carrying that team all the way to the finals to eventually lose to the Spurs. I think they were swept, if I'm not mistaken. But Brown is also coached with the Lakers, was fired shortly. I think it was like 5 days or something. He didn't last too long in the job. He might have had he might have had a stop elsewhere, but the Kings hired him. 3 years. First year, they make the playoffs. They lose in 7 to the Golden State Warriors. The second year, I think they barely just squeaked in the play-in. And the third year, I believe he was fired. So I like Mike Brown as an option. I'm just curious how the Knicks would handle the defensive side of the ball and if he's the championship coach that the Knicks really need because he's never won a championship. And would they exhaust all resources? And that's how it goes. I'm really I'm as my final thoughts, and it's going to seem conjumbled. Like, what's the Knicks' philosophy? What are they looking for? Are they looking for an experienced head coach? Are they looking for a modern offensive mind? And Mike Brown is in a modern offensive mind, but do the Knicks still want to tap into Johnny Bryant? Do they want to tap into a guy like Sam Cassell? Do they want to tap into a guy like Chris Quinn, who's been highly spoken about as Eric Spoelstra's right-hand man in Miami? It's interesting, man. It's interesting. And I'll say this for the final thoughts. I do think that the Knicks should exhaust all resources. I think they should do a comprehensive search, but you really can't take too long. You can take like a decent amount of time, but you got to figure the draft is coming up soon. The Knicks, again, do have a second-round pick, and eventually you have to figure out what you got to do with this roster. How does the coach fit in with the roster? How does the roster fit in with the coach? And again, looking for that modern team, several other important decisions with the roster have to be made. So, my thoughts exactly, it's an interesting search. I think you could go either way about it, whether you're skeptical or whether you trust the process fully. I'm not blindly optimistic, but I'm not blindly negative either. I'm kind of interested. I'm mum. If you had to describe my thoughts, I'm mum on the coaching search. So we'll see what happens. We'll see what happens with the Knicks coaching search. Hopefully they hire one soon. rather soon. And hopefully they take their time, exhaust all resources, as I've mentioned in this video. But if you guys haven't already, hit the like button, subscribe, turn the notification bell so you want to go live or drop a new video. Plenty more videos to come. This is the off season. Potential stream, possibly, maybe. Have you guys covered on that. I'll possibly send out a post and advertise if a potential off season stream is coming up. But regardless, you guys have been great with support. Appreciate you all. Talk to you later.